Yeah, this is a fascinating topic, and was really one of the chief things that got me into the space initially was this problem of incentivizing content, both production and distribution on the internet. And this is something a lot of people have worked on and has been really difficult to figure out how to actually achieve it. And on the one hand, we have things like Wikipedia, which is barely surviving and has to plead with us for donations every few months. I once met Mark Zuckerberg. I had 3 minutes with him, and I pleaded with him in those 3 minutes to just fund Wikipedia, and he promised me to do it. So if you ever meet Mark, tell him he hasn't held up his end of the bargain. But if he's not going to do it, then we can try and figure out our own systems. And so it seems like up till now, the only successful business model on the internet has been advertising, and so maybe this is a decent place to start in terms of what are the implications of advertising being the only dominant business model on the internet. What does that mean for users, and what does that mean for people who are trying to monetize content and be producers of digital media? Esther, why don't we start with you?
Well, I think the real kind of core of this subject goes to power. I think it really disbalances the power relationships and the priorities that people have and the way that we give value to things. I think that the fact that, for example, I was looking at the numbers and it's on average $12. $12 is the price tag associated with a person's Facebook profile. So for Facebook, I'm...
Like $12 a year?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I'm worth $12. Every single one of my personal conversations, every single one of my pictures, every single article that I've posted, every single thing that I've done on that platform is worth $12 in advertising bucks for Facebook. And I would say...
How does that make you feel?
Well, I think first thing it made me think was, that's nothing. And the second thing it made me think was, I'd definitely be willing to pay, $12.50, if not $15.50, if not $22.50, if not potentially even $122.50, to be on a platform where I could choose what's done with the information that's essentially most core to me as a person, my personality, my thoughts, and my privacy, I think most importantly. So I think it engages all of these topics, it engages all of these ways of thinking about where we associate value and how we have control over our ability to, if data is going to be monetized, then I think people should have the right, and I do believe it's a fundamental right, to decide how that's monetized and the values associated with any platform that they choose to go on. So I believe that this space is so ripe for innovation, and there's going to be so many different platforms that are going to spring up where people are going to have really the opportunity to be empowered to decide what are the values of that platform, and they can buy into it. And I believe, just starting from myself, essentially, are willing to pay a dollar amount associated with it. And that's what hasn't been yet challenged because we've always gone with this assumption that the platforms that we have are free, quote unquote, but I think that we're coming to realize that A, they're not free, and B, we probably want to be paying for them. So that.
Go ahead, if anyone wants to follow up, please don't be afraid.
Sure. Well, I guess the increase of the sort of ad-driven model it's a little disappointing as a consumer. You go to movies now and you have to sit through a bunch of ads. I'm very thankful that I've never gone to a music concert and had to sit through some ads at the start of the concert. So maybe that's coming. But yeah,
is it coming?
Yeah. But anyways, that's an example of something where you're not consuming a digital product, you're consuming a real world experience. And so luckily, since this is Music Week, we can talk a bit about music. A big fraction of music is based on real world experiences. Of course, we also consume digital files. We see the success of different streaming services, some of them with ad-driven models where you don't have to pay as a user. I'm not sure what the statistics look like in terms of users who opt to pay $10 for Spotify as opposed to using the the free ad-driven service. But anyways, the technologies that we're talking about, Bitcoin, blockchain, taking those technologies and applying it to music, it does offer an interesting alternative in terms of smoothing out some of the frictions that are associated with payments. We're still not sure it's going to work in terms of users being willing to pay for content. So the business case has to be made, but at least the technology is going to enable it, it seems.
Yes, first of all, I kind of disagree that it's the only business model. Like in my world, this is the main thing that is being challenged. I'd like to go over the reason why it is that way. First of all, the distribution of content is not yet possible in a decentralized way. And you don't want to like have a small hosting and then you get overly popular and then it get like it's and people like to have all the same information at the source of information from the same like portal, Facebook, Twitter. So that's one. The second reason is access to payment. Like to democratize access to payment is what the cryptocurrencies allowed. I think first and foremost. Right now it's in adoption phase. It's more used for like it's expensive. So in the future there's going to be means of transacting very small amount with very small fee. And on top of that, like why advertising is the main reason why the only way to monetize right now is there's been no like clever business model because of the first two reasons. And I think blockchain and smart contract allowed to enforce like contract, and it's it's commonly known as the cost to pay something that's very small incurs more cost to your train of thought. So making the decision voluntarily to pay 25 cents for something costs you more in time, so you just like you get stuck in decision-making choice. So on that front, I know of a few cryptocurrencies that have another kind of model where if you don't spend your power, like it's a blockchain called Steam, so you have to spend your power somewhere, otherwise you kind of lose it. So it's a kind of a way to extract popular content from the internet. It's also a way to monetize people without forcing. It's like instead of the new currency that's being issued, being given to computers that expense electricity, it's being given to people who produce content. So that's it's a very interesting point to start that you claim that the only business model, like in my world, like I'm into cryptocurrencies and decentralized content distribution, and I haven't realized so far that that's the main thing we want to challenge. And so there's hope.
So a bit like Mathieu just said, it's really about the business model. And currently there seems to be only one business model, which is ads and publicity, which is great for the big businesses, but for all the independent players, how they do it. And the way we can see it is we just need more experimentation. So the question is, who will do this experimentation? So right now it can be you right there, it can be you right there, it can be anyone that has the motivation and the will and that want to spend the time to acquire the knowledge to know how to change our current business model. So how we do that? We inspire ourselves from others that did other innovation. So by example, we made a helicopter based on observing the nature and looking at how an helicopter works. We made algorithmic and AI by looking at our brain and how it's working. So right now what we need to change probably or experiment is our social behavior in terms of exchange of value and exchange of money, and how we can value the content of the user. Does the user really care about its content? Maybe, I wish. But currently, the model that we see, the user doesn't seem to care that much. So maybe we have to find model that user will benefit much more. Maybe not on the money side, but maybe on other added value. A great experience, a live show that you enjoy a lot and that you contribute in a way that can be good contact. How we monetize that, how we make it as a value. So that's the question, how we innovate and transform that to value exchange between people.
So that's exactly the lines along which I was going to follow up in terms of, I've certainly heard this sentiment and I've even expressed it myself before. I'm not sure I fully agree with it, but that, in the age of, say, post-Napster, where information is so easy to replicate, the role of the musician kind of changes from the pure production recording to more focus on live performance. And that, if you're not out there touring and building a following and engaging with fans in new and creative ways, then maybe you don't deserve to make money. But, that might be the case. It's a little easier to make that case in the music industry than in some of the other digital media industries. For instance, if you're a blogger, right, and you're trying to make a living, aggregating information and writing insightful reports on it, you don't really have the opportunity to put on a show and sell tickets to, stand on stage and read your blog to people. So, it's sort of a two-part question on, is it true that that's how we should think about music? That it should be really if you're going to be a musician, you should be trying to make money on the road rather than in somehow selling your content? Is there something in between? Something related to like cultural storytelling or other kinds of events that can take place. And then on the other side, for media that's not music and live performance oriented, how can we start thinking about monetizing that in a way that isn't just purely about advertising? And we've touched on some of that already, but maybe that's a little more directed.
I think that this is a really complex question, and there's a lot of moving pieces, but it goes down to, I think, a good place to start thinking about solutions is really determining the communities, establishing communities in a different way, and determining audiences and connections, and seeing really value as something similar to what Phil was saying, as relational. And then there's different types of value. There's monetary value, obviously, which is an essential element, but there's also a lot of different types of value that translate economically, but don't necessarily start that way. So I think that by virtue of creating communities on decentralized platforms where the hierarchies are challenged, and the ways that value is created in those places is established in new ways, people are able to then, once they themselves have the currency of that platform, are able to then determine where they want to spend it. And so that's really what it comes down to. Does there a value lie in going to a physical concert? Does there a value lie in being able to go on that person's, we can imagine an equivalent to a YouTube channel where, you see a lot of people that are very popular on YouTube, and based on how many views they get advertising money. So they don't get money from the people whose products they review, let's say, but they get advertising money. So we can imagine how you could have the equivalent of a wallet on one of these platforms, and then by virtue of clicking on something and spending X amount of time on that part of the platform, for example, watching an artist's video or any other way of consuming that content, automatically funding from your wallet would go there. And then that would potentially solve some of the issues around decision making. And I think micropayments, this is where they've kind of hit some significant challenges, because we only have so much decision-making opportunities in a day. And so if we're making decisions about whether I should have vanilla ice cream or chocolate ice cream or cookie dough, it's not a decision around more important things like, who do I want to help make successful? Who is the artist who I want to put my money behind? mind. So if we can find ways to, again, using AI, using our understanding of how our brain works, how decision-making happens, and really tailor platforms to make them easy and simple to use around those values, I think that there's a lot of room for innovation.
I'll just jump in on both of your questions. The first is, what about the model where you go on the road, you make the money on the road? And if you asked me that question yesterday, I'm not sure how I would have answered it. But earlier today, I don't know how many people were here, but there was a really fantastic panel on ticketing and secondary markets for tickets. And it really opened my eyes. I'm not coming from a music perspective, I'm coming from a technical perspective. But that's a complete mess. And there's no way that artists are making money through concerts when tickets are selling for less than face value. They're selling on secondary markets that's profiting the people who are running the secondary markets without much of the money. There's different business models there, but generally by default the money's not flowing back to the artists, and it's not necessarily your fans that are benefiting from those tickets, right? Maybe tickets just go to the richest people who can pay for the tickets. And so yeah, this idea that you should make money on the road is even worse than I initially thought.
But is that a problem with the idea or with the current implementation?
Right, so what can we do? So what we can do is we can think of, well, let's just go back to payments. Payments are a little simpler. So a payment, basically, it doesn't matter if it's the music industry or the finance industry, the problems are all the same. You have an origin, the payment starts somewhere. Someone has to decide that that payment has to be made. The payment's going to go somewhere, so you have to know where it's going. You have to be able to identify who the parties are that should be receiving the payment, and then you have a bunch of people in the middle. And so when you look at applying, for example, blockchain technology to payments, you can basically innovate on all three levels. It's been talked about, you can automate the starting point of that payment. You can automate it so that there's no user decisions that have to be involved. Software can take care of, let's talk about royalties, for example. So based on what you listen to, maybe it's a pay per listen model. Maybe it's a flat fee. You pay $10, but it goes through what you listen to and it splits it up. Into different fractions, and then how can you get the artist's information? So artist information's maybe easy when you think about the artist, but when you think about the sound engineer or different people that should be receiving these royalties, how do you keep track of all that? There's a pretty good project called .blockchain where they have some proposals of putting this information into one of these ledger technologies and then having your audio file kind of point at that information so you know where that revenue is flowing. And then the final question is how many people have to sit in the middle of that transaction? And with blockchain technologies, you can get that number down to zero. It can go directly, from me, my computer, listening to the music, to the people who produce that music with nobody in between. Not Visa, not a bank, not any sort of organizations, music industry organizations.
Yes, so you were asking how artists will be able to monetize. I think it's unfair to have most of the money being on tour while most of the people want to consume it digitally. I think with blockchain, there's many new ways that these things can be monetized. So in the future, I foresee artists to be more like, they might want to subscribe to a subset of like blockchain component that make it easier for them to kind of make a small ICO to issue tokens and to give back to those who gave them money at first. If you want to do a concert, like you need some money to ease access to capital investment. And I really agree with not blockchain, but like ease of small transaction and democratization of payments. It allows to pay much smaller amount without having like an authoritative entity that manage everything. So I could myself dedicate, let's say, $20 to whatever I listen to, and it will be distributed accordingly. And I think that's also a big philosophical problem that might take a generation also to evolve. Like I think we've been raised in a world where people are forced to pay, like having access to the CD. Now, like if you manage to pirate it, you're like, yay! Like, but that's not it's not really, it doesn't scale in the long term, it doesn't give back. So I think, it might take some time and some technology to ease access to small transaction and to have a smart kind of contract that allow to redistribute without a central entity the funds to the producers, to establish like business intelligence into a smart contract. Yeah.
I'll jump on both what Jérémy and Mathieu just said. Jérémy was talking a bit about identity and how it's so there's few components that will be required, probably. One of them is how we match the identity with the value and the content. The solution of .blockchain is a good experiment. They're currently working with SOCAN here. SOCAN just provide to them 65 million song to experiment and see what is possible. And the way they see this experimentation is performed is how we put content in a specific format, a bit like MP3 or waveform, but how we put content in a way that can be exchanged and tracked, and we can have a log of what's happening to the data. So if I'm an artist, I produce content, I can put it on the platform and then track what's happening to it and interact using the data as the intermediary between me and the consumer, instead of having other intermediary. The data act as an intermediary, and that way, so we see, by example, Imogen Heap currently exploring blockchain solution and trying to figure out how we can interact with the data and then use that data to interact with consumer. And I think we just need more artists thinking and finding how to use the value and the content as a medium itself and experiment as artists with this way. So by example, if we pair a software engineer with an artist and with someone in the production industry, and we try to solve that problematic, then we start to do some little experiment and try to solve it. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's interesting. Again, technology it's always this double-edged sword, and as we build, better and better cryptography, on the one hand, we enable sort of more freedom and more tools like BitTorrent for file sharing, which is heavily based on cryptography and blockchains, of course. But on the other hand, we start to have more advanced technologies and techniques for like obfuscation and digital rights management, right? So how should we, how should we be looking at that? Should we be pursuing an aggressive digital rights management approach so that we can actually lock down the rights within the cryptography, or should we try to build a more robust culture that can actually, provide a living to an artist without having to go through this, sort of authoritarian control over the content? Don't all speak up at once.
As a ethical hacker, I would say
has anyone been stopped by a digital right management here? Like, yeah. I don't even know what that is.
No, not yet, and I agree. Anytime someone comes to me and says, "Oh, digital rights management," I kind of scoff, because the crypto isn't there yet. But if you pay attention to some of like the latest advancements in, say, zero-knowledge cryptographic proofs, and some of the privacy-based proofs and homomorphic encryption and all this kind of stuff, which basically, this is just mumble jumble for talking about how you can do operations on data without knowing what the data is. So for instance, you might be able to have an MP3 on your computer that's encrypted, and even though you can play the MP3 through your speaker, you can never get an unencrypted version of it. So you can't give it to someone else without also giving them a key, and maybe that key is tied to your wallet, so if they have it, they can take your money too, right? So these are the kinds of technologies that are going to be within reason in the near future. And so, is that something that we should be pursuing as an approach, or is that a dangerous path to go down?
Well,
I feel pretty strongly about this stuff, and I think it goes kind of a bit back to the previous panel with David Lametti, who's obviously an elected member of Parliament and works on innovation as well. And I think that he really said it well, speaking about the need for innovation to happen, and then figuring out regulation and figuring out any of the downsides, back ends, things that people might be taking advantage of, things that could go wrong afterwards. I think it's essential, everybody here knows, the internet would not have been possible had it been, regulated. So many technological innovations would not be possible without people being able to create with a free mind, with a free heart. I think that there's privacy concerns. I think that we have to think about privacy concerns, and I think in the age of the internet where our lives are online and our work is online, we have to be very cognizant of how we protect ourselves, how we protect our thoughts, how we protect our privacy. But I think that when it comes to regulation, it's kind of several issues together, but when we try to piece them out, I think regulation really does need to come at the tail end, because we do have structures and laws and systems that already exist, I think, to prevent them being taken advantage of. But then when you get into details around how cryptography can be penetrated, I think that's another conversation as well that's worth having. But when it comes to regulation, I think that innovation has to come first.
I like the idea of digital right expression instead of digital right management, where you create content and you say, okay, here's the 100,000 way I want my content to be used, and here's the few way I do not want. And by doing that, we can implement some solution for the few ways that are most common and let freedom. So we saw experiment with Creative Commons, with various ways, but that wasn't implemented cryptographically. Does cryptography will help? Probably. I guess Jeremy is the best to answer on that side. But on the artist side, to protect his content, it's more about having the freedom to make it in various possibilities and having a choice. So it's more a freedom of choice in terms of there's plenty of artists. We always name the most common, but Radiohead is one of them, where they try to explore different ways to express the content and the value of their song without having to implement or enforce in a way that can be non-beneficial for the consumer. So I think it go back to experimenting and having people that willing to test and talking with regulators and being open to have the discussion with regulators, which in Canada I've seen on every level, like in banking, in medical, and even in music. There's an openness to innovation that we're lucky to have. So I guess it's maybe the part of the artist to sit and say, okay, what can we do together?
I think that if I was an artist in the crypto universe, I would first use the web of trust to make my entity verifiable. So when I issue content, people know it's from me. When I receive payment, people know it goes to me. And because the digital right management, it only works for a small amount of time with HDMI, and because it's very computing intensive. And with audio, you can totally forget about that. I'm convinced of that. And so it's about being able to verify that the money goes to the artists, and it's not really blockchain, it's more cryptography, but also verifying your identity and tying it together, let's say with stuff like Keybase, and people will voluntarily pay for the content without being forced to do it, which is what the DMR is trying to do.
Yeah, I would say as a cryptographer, cryptography is sort of sleight of hand. I mean, they're trying to get you focused on the actual process itself, or the fancy, homomorphic encryption, snarks, whatever. But the dirty secret is that there's a key that decrypts the content, and if it's in the context of music, if you're listening to it, that key is somewhere, right? It's somewhere in your device. And it's just a matter of extracting it. And there's nothing you can really throw at it from a crypto perspective that doesn't change the fundamental principle that there has to be a decryption key somewhere. And so really DRM, the way I see it, is it's just, it's more companies want their DRM to be better than the other companies, just so that they don't become known as the people that are the source of leaks for pirated media. So it's just a question of, creating enough barriers to entry to getting that key out of the device. It's like the saying, you don't have to outrun the bear, you just have to outrun your friend. That's what a lot of DRM is. It's just nobody wants to be the company that has the really bad platform that you can just scrape media off of. But no DRM works, and there's that fundamental problem that you would have to fix that I don't see that you could even fix, even with fancy crypto.
So is it fair to say that there's consensus among the experts that DRM is the wrong approach, and anyone who's working on it should stop?
So as a barrier to entry, it's okay. I mean, if you do want to, try and make people put some effort into stealing from you personally, then I think it is a worthwhile pursuit. But it's not, as far as making sure that no one ever gets access to something ever, it doesn't work.
Might work with Apple AirPod. I'm sure Apple will find a way to make people pay for the iTunes content.
Right.
It's hardware implemented, and audio does not require any intensive computation, so it doesn't.
Right. So that's one way to actually do it, is to use hardware.
Yeah, so you can put the key in the earphones, and people have talked about that, right. The decryption key, and that's fine. And maybe it's a little harder to get out of an earphone than it is to get out of your computer, where it's sitting there in RAM and software. But you can still do reverse engineering, and people have stolen keys out of hardware chips before. That's how DVD broke, for example.
Cool. We got 5 minutes? Yeah, sure. Let's go to questions. Yeah.
I'm with Esther in that I think it's a power issue. Don't forget, the music industry originally was just basically a mafia-driven industry, right? There were thuggeries, all kinds of stuff that was going on. Isn't part of the reason why blockchain is not being adopted universally in so many areas is because it's not manipulable, like the stock market and the Ponzi scheme called the economic system that we have in the banking system. There's so many people making money because of the ability to manipulate what's going on with the digital information. The blockchain eliminates quite a bit of that, so that you're de-incentivizing an entire portion of the industry that's used to making money for nothing. Now they have to actually earn it, and the blockchain brings that kind of transparency through, right? So I think the fundamental thing is, we have a group of people. That's the first question, and the second question is, if you have an entire industry that is providing a service like Facebook to users for free, and the users are the data, and they're used to getting that data for free because we're volunteering, and they're monetizing all of that. First of all, why aren't we getting a cut? And secondly, it's a really unfair power play there. That's just a huge power grab for a whole generation that thinks that the social media is actually a great thing, not knowing in the future it's something that will actually entrap them. So I just want to throw that out there.
Well, I don't think there's any blockchain application for music right now. I think the main issue is the barrier of entry to payment and easing access to small transaction, and coming up with business model which does not incur me paying like 25 cents for a song by force or not by force. And so it's happening. So this blockchain allowed for enforceable the economic model, not for economic model. And low friction payment allow for economic model. So it's just not happened yet, but it's a work in progress. And many artists, they publish their own content, they receive payment in either PayPal or Bitcoin, and then they can add, be included into like 2.0 business model, which does not make people pay a specific amount for.
Yeah, a funny thing that I've observed is that there's a lot of intermediates that could get disintermediated by technology, whether it's blockchain or other modernization. But it seems like every intermediary deals themselves with other intermediaries, and even though they're not looking at the mirror saying, I'm going to get disintermediated, they're saying, who can I go out and disintermediate? So, for example, banks, they might be scared about Bitcoin or blockchain technology. No, they're like, well, we don't like Payments Canada. We don't want to route all our money through them. Let's replace Payments Canada with a blockchain, right? And so everyone's looking to see who they can replace, not looking at the mirror saying, am I going to be replaced? And so, so you do have that sort of defensive mechanism, but you're also on the offense with other people that you're dealing with. And so I don't know, I think that argument could be made about modernization of anything. So industries do modernize over time, and they do change. And so even though the incentives aren't there to change, the wheels of change happen somehow.
Yeah, in that sense, I think it's about how we incentive and help or invest in the creative and bright minds that can help supporting these transitions. So first, acknowledging that there's a transition happening, and this transition, either people will be part of it or not, and people that will be part of it will probably have to invest time, energy, and resources with creative mind and bright minds, thinking about how we innovate the right way for the upcoming 10 or 20 years. So it's more about finding these key people that are bright or have clever ideas and willing to take risk. It always goes to risk, and we see in the banking industry and in other industry that didn't take the right risk at the right time, but end up having bad infrastructure, and now they're crumbling over a bunch of problems technically and in their business model too. So this can happen in the digital media industry too, if there's no people willing to take these risks. So I think it's about risk and investment in the right people.
I would say, I can't think of a more interesting time to be living in. As the Japanese say, we live in very, very interesting times. And more than that, it's a fundamental shift, I think. We have in front of us, and we're, I think, in it right now, in the opportunity to be able to rethink things in a knowledge-based economy. That's essentially the shift that has taken place. We now live in a knowledge-based economy, which means that it's not the means of production that matter. It's what is the output? What is the mind capable of creating? And how are we able to think about that in structures that fall outside of the hierarchies that we traditionally know them to be? And that really leaves room, I think, for creativity. It leaves room for communities, and it leaves room for going back to the things that we value and how we give that value meaning. And I think blockchain technologies, I think that smart contracts, AI, all of those things are solely there to facilitate the essence of de-hierarchizing, essentially. So I might have just made up a word, but I see faces here that it resonates with. So.
Well, I like to see it bottom up, just the term music industry to me, it sounds like the written text industry. It's kind of backward looking at it. So I think off the ground will be built other kind of hierarchy, but they're gonna come in time, and they're gonna be impossible to break.
Cool. I think that's a wrap. Thank you everyone for listening. Let's thank our panelists.